Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce, Ukraine War News Update. First one thereof, if you discount my breaking news update, so really the second one thereof, for the 21st of September 2024. And this episode is sponsored by High Fives in the White House. Why do I say this? What I'm going to say is going to seem really callous. So I want you to assume that there is obviously a massive human element to this, and that is disastrous and horrific. But if you forget this psychological, emotional, human aspect to this and just think in terms of raw capacity and capability of the Russian army, if you said to the Americans 2.5 years ago, in 2.5 years' time, the Russian army will be seriously degraded to the point where they are trying to steal people from other countries and throw them into the front line, where they are trying to work out how to mobilize because they've been attrited and degraded so much that they've lost 200,000 dead, 500,000 wounded, and so on and so forth. If you had told the Americans that the Russians would have lost thousands and thousands of pieces of equipment, tens of thousands of pieces of equipment, in terms of infantry fighting vehicles, tanks, trucks, SUVs, trains. You know, if 2.5 years ago you had said that the Black Sea Fleet would have been either sunk, incapacitated, or sent down to another port and Sevastopol was gathering cobwebs. If you had said 2.5 years ago that 3 ammunition depots were wiped out, were going to be wiped out within a week, that would disappear phenomenal amounts of Russian ammunition and therefore capacity and capability. And all of that would have been achieved without losing a single American soldier on behalf of the Americans. You'd have been like, yeah, whatever, that's never going to happen. 2.5 years later, at the expense of huge numbers of Ukrainians, like the sacrifices is massive, but at the expense of sending over a bunch of Bradleys, some ATACMs, and some HIMARS, some Patriot systems, okay, you can count out, it seems like a lot, but actually, it's a relatively small price to pay for some insane successes for not just the Ukrainians, but for the American strategic objective, for their plan of how the world looks militarily and politically. So I say this because we are seeing consistently, and I had someone saying yesterday, Schnitzel von Krum, quite rightly saying, I think you're being a bit too positive about the situation for the Ukrainians. Because this is a difference between looking at the micro and the macro. When you look at the micro, things are really horrific on the Eastern Front. Ukraine is losing ground, and fairly significant amounts of ground if you're looking closely at the map. But if you're looking at the course of the war and having taken back 50% of what the Russians took initially, and making the Russians fight for every square kilometre so that they are losing and losing and losing that capacity. Yeah, it's horrific for the Ukrainians and for those giving up their lives for doing that. But from a zoomed out macro perspective, Russia is just committing military and political and economic harikiri. It's just, they are throwing themselves on their own sword. And it's insane. And I look at these explosions at the ammunition depots, and you've got the Americans drip feeding stuff to the Ukrainians, which is really frustrating because you think this could have been achieved so much quicker without so many Ukrainian lives. But on the other hand, you then have this almost conspiratorial theory that actually by drip feeding stuff to the Ukrainians and at the sacrifice of Ukrainian lives, the Russians are being far more fundamentally attrited and degraded than they otherwise would have been. And this is forcing the Ukrainians to create their own weaponry, which could have been used last night. There are theories that the Neptune missile was used, an adapted Neptune missile was used to destroy one of the ammo depots that I reported on earlier, or was part of the the weaponry that was the wave that was used. The Ukrainians are doing an incredible job at really hitting the Russians hard. The Russians have crippled the Ukrainian energy system. They have killed and wounded an awful lot of soldiers and civilians. And in many contexts, the Ukrainians are on their knees. But what they've been able to do to the Russians, a much larger country with a bigger population and, bigger pool of hydrocarbons and potential economy, if not actual economy, the Ukrainians have done an insanely good job with the help of Western nations. And there's this tension between, well, yeah, could it have been much more? I mean, what if they had been able to use ATACMS, and could they have destroyed? And you wonder whether, had the US given Ukraine everything they wanted straight away, whether there would have been this fundamental degradation of Russian capabilities. So, would you have seen straight away this? Well, you possibly wouldn't have got this development of really long-range drones that's kind of come out this needs must situation by not being given the stuff by the Americans. It's forcing the Ukrainians to make their own stuff and then hitting much, much deeper into Russia than they otherwise would have done if they'd just been relying on Western weaponry. And so you've got this kind of tension, balancing act, and on the one hand, it's terrible that the Western nations haven't given enough stuff at the right time and have made Ukraine pay for it in lives and territory. But on the other hand, it's potentially, I don't know if history will look back and say, well, if they hadn't been so slow in helping Ukraine in many contexts, and Ukraine wouldn't have developed their own abilities and wouldn't have taken so many risks, like destroying things very close to Moscow or so on and so forth. Anyway, that's a long intro to what's happened today. And we are seeing incredibly high numbers across these categories that we normally see, but even higher. So personnel is now not just above 1,300, but 1,440 personnel lost. That's a massive number. There's obviously a lot of activity taking place in Kursk. The Russians are throwing themselves at Pokrovsk, at Vuhledar. Bit of stabilization possibly in Vuhledar by the looks of it. As in, I've done my mapping. I just need to record the video. 4 days of mapping. There's a lot of territory that the Russians have taken. So Pokrovsk region and all along that east, and even going up into the northeast, the Russians are taking territory. But the question is, at what cost? And here we see 21 tanks. Another day of very high tank losses, over twice the daily average, and some. Or almost 3 times the daily average. Well, 2.5. So 38 troop-carrying AFVs, easily double the daily average. 58 artillery systems, right back up there at sort of 3 times the daily average for that category. 4 multiple launch rocket systems is that's got to be double the daily average. And then 68 vehicles and fuel tanks, 10 pieces of special equipment. This is a painful day for the Russians on the normal equipment front. On the personnel front, we are above that 1,300. I talk about the range being very high these days. The last 6 months have been 1,000 to 1,300. A couple of anomalous days. You had one at 1,780, was it? 1,740, something like that. But 1,440 is a really bad day for the Russians. Not too much video footage to look at because I think the bandwidth has been strangled by the ammunition depot strikes from last night. Russian military housing complex is burnt down in Engels. The city is home to a strategic bomber military base of the same name, often used to strike against Ukraine. So the Engels air base in Saratov, you've got Engels 2. We have the military housing complex burning down. Now, is that someone leaving on a cooker, a fat fire, or is it sabotage? Is it a strike? I don't know. Fire there. Worth noting. Right, then we get on to strikes. So I don't have an Andrew Perpetua loss list. I'll check at the end of the video, see if one's come out. We have a fairly quiet night in some regards in terms of Russian strikes on Ukraine as far as the drones are concerned. So we only had 16 drones where we've been used to 40, 50, 60, was it 60? Might have been 70 odd last night, was it? Not last night, night before. So So last night, only 16 is a very small number of drones sent into Ukraine. 11 of those were shot down, and I believe 5 others were intercepted were lost due to electronic warfare countermeasures. So 0% success rate in terms of drones as far as hitting their intended targets. Then we have 5 out of 5 KH-59-69 cruise missiles taken out. On the other hand, though, 0 out of 4 Iskander-M or KN-23, depending on whether it's the Iskander, the Russian missile, or the North Korean missile. But 0 out of 4 of them taken out. I don't know the success of those missiles in terms of what the Russians were aiming for and whether they hit them, but they certainly weren't intercepted. Ballistic missiles, much more difficult to take those out, especially if you're not aiming for somewhere like Kiev, where you've got the ability to shoot down ballistic missiles with the PAC-3 Patriots or the SAMP-T French, Italian provided equivalent. Okay, so at night, Russians attacked Kryvyi Rih. 3 people were killed, including a 12-year-old boy. Don't know whether that was where the ballistic missiles ended up, but as you can see here, it looks like civilian infrastructure has been struck, not particularly anything of military character there. This is an incredible bit of footage. Someone driving around in Kharkiv last night, and then just in front of them, a bomb. I don't know if it's a bomb. It says this is one of the moment bombs fell on the city. I don't know if it's an aviation bomb or whether that is a ballistic missile. Tim White here said bomb, but I don't know. Quite a lot of explosive material there. Incredible footage. And that's life in Kharkiv. Indeed, Russian forces attacked civilians in Ukraine's Dnipropetrovsk Oblast with 4 Iskander-M. So that appears to be where those Iskanders were sent in Dnipropetrovsk. 5 KH-59-69 guided air launch missiles and 16 attack drones. So Euromaidan press implying that all of that ordnance was sent against Dnipropetrovsk, but there were 3 guided glide bombs hitting Kharkiv. That was last night's report, and that's caught on camera there. Strikes in the city centre with 1 cub hitting right in front of the hospital next to the Kharkiv Palace, which was destroyed in an earlier missile strike. And then we had news that Ukraine sent 101 drones, as according to Russians. Russians claim they shot down 101 Ukrainian drones. And the claims were, in fact, I'll talk about that a little later. Actually, that was in the wrong place. So apologies for that. We'll go back to 101 drones in a second. Just on the Russian strikes, reminder of what Russia do, often with purposeful strikes on emergency services. They do this with double taps. Andrew Perpetua here saying Russia struck firefighters, or they just take out emergency services depots, like a fire brigade depot here being struck by the Russians directly. And then they struck them again, according to Andrew, with pictures to show that the Russians don't have a problem with taking out emergency services because Russia. Allegedly, the remains of a new Ukrainian missile drone, the Palyantsia, found by the Russians in Kursk Oblast. So this is the new is it the jet-propelled or rocket-propelled drone that they have said that they are now producing. It could have been used in a strike on somewhere in Kursk Oblast. So anyway, as mentioned earlier, the Russians claim that 101 drones were fired into Russia and that they were shot down here. We have the claims again from the Russians that 53 were destroyed over Bryansk region, 18 shot down over Krasnodar territory, which is where one of the ammunition depots was, 16 over the waters of the Sea of Azov, 5 over the Kaluga region, 3 each over Tver and Belgorod. So Tver is where another ammunition depot was, just 10 miles, 16 kilometers south of the Toropets ammunition depot that was destroyed the other night. 1 each over the Kursk and Smolensk regions, as well as over the territory of the Crimean Peninsula. And the Crimean Peninsula could have seen a strike here. Military training ground is burning at Cape Chowder. in Crimea there. So firms data confirming something was struck, and it looks like a military training ground. Anyway, details might come out about that. Now, Turchny has done an analysis on the strikes the other night in Toropets. So just before we go on and quickly summarize what I've already said in the breaking news video, Turchny have said that Sentinel-2 imagery confirms the destruction of the majority of ECMs from the 107th, so these are the kind of bunkers of munition, of the 107th Arsenal of GRAU and Toropets. This has enabled a more comprehensive battle damage assessment to be possible. So they say with a high level of certainty, 46 ECMs were visually confirmed to have been completely destroyed, so that's 74.19% of the original total of 62 of those ECMs. So you've got something in the sort of bottom right hand corner of the whole facility. This is a newer part of the ammunition depot. These ones in the southeastern corner seem to be somewhat unaffected, but you don't know what the heat damage and other kind of ramifications to those bunkers might have been. But so many of the other ones completely destroyed, and that's Tochny's analysis there. ECM damage ratio 74% completely destroyed, 26 remaining. 40 open stored ammunition and buildings damaged or destroyed. Significant damage resulting from stored ammunition is also evident with the northeastern areas of the facility shown here. This confirms the hazardous consequences of Russia's ammunition storage practices as referenced in a previous thread. So they stored a lot of stuff outside here, and that made it much more vulnerable to being struck. And the idea was, the claim was that they sent 100 odd drones into this facility. And you can see some of the fires here in this satellite imagery, and some of these outdoor storage areas being particularly vulnerable to strikes, so on and so forth. Okay, we'll go through this. So because we're going to then talk about two more ones that struck today or last night. In 2018, Russian Minister Bulgakov claimed that the 107th Arsenal could withstand a nuclear strike. Ukrainian strikes on a facility by conventional munitions invalidates these claims. The following image, the official statement from the Russian MOD on the 2nd of June 2018, so that if you don't believe them, there is a proof. The original construction process of the bunkers, which later became the 107th ECMs, is shown here, consisting of bunkers, shallow in depth, thin perimeter walls, around 2.5 meter slab roofs, roof slab, and the sides, not the roofs of each ECM covered, further nullifies Bulgakov's claims. In other words, these are a bit rubbish. So there you go. Now, considering it's thought that there are different claims here. Some people saying, the Kyiv Independent, for example, saying Ukraine strike on Toropets the other night, not the one last night, may have destroyed up to 3 months worth of ammunition, according to Estonian military intelligence head. Ukraine's drone strike there obviously doing severe damage, and we saw that visually. And for that number of ECMs, that number of bunkers, and that amount of ammunition to have been almost certainly destroyed, will have a tangible effect on the Russian ability to continue fighting this war in the manner that they have been, right? So something will change going forward, I'm fairly sure. And that was bad enough. That's one ammunition depot, significant, huge depot, largely destroyed by the Ukrainians. As War Vehicle Tracker says, Russia is speed running their munition depots. And this is as a result of last night. Okay, so you got Toropets from 3 nights ago and last night. And the main problem for them is there is just no way for them to stop these attacks on munition depots, other than to move literally each depot in range, out of range, which would take years. So they'd have to build up other depots or just store stuff out in the open, just up in Siberia somewhere. These being North Korean is a funny addition. So the ammunition being North Korean adds to that. So what happened last night? Well, the first thing is that we saw a strike on Toropets again. So this is the munition depot. The first Toropets one 3 nights ago was some 500 kilometers north of the Ukrainian border, and then there was one just 10 kilometers, 16 kilometers, 10 miles south of the original one. I presume this means that the original one is still burning. And then last night this was done, and that's a similar kind of area, not too much smaller than the other ammunition depot, going up in smoke by the looks of it. That's a massive set of fires according to the firm's data, and there's a distance between the two. Now, we don't have an awful lot of footage coming from here, so the firm's data, I think, tells you quite a lot, right? So the otherwise the footage is not as impressive, if you like, as the one down in Krasnodar Krai, which is phenomenal. But there is some footage coming from here. Ukrainian drone attack struck another massive munitions arsenal in Tver, 23rd missile and artillery storage site close to the other one. And firm's maps came and gave increasingly more impressive results there. Ammo crates have been seen to be visible in previous satellite images of the dump, including what's thought to be S-300 or S-400 missiles, which is significant. They use those an awful lot. They do have a lot of those missiles, so it'd be nice for them not to have a lot of those missiles, obviously. Special Kherson Cat says this is a bit smaller arsenal in Toropets' second one compared to the other Toropets one, but still really significant. Firm's data shows these two together. What else? They say, this is Special Kherson Cat says, rather sadly, we don't have a lot of good quality footage of the detonation from last night's attack on that second Toropets one, but I think it's still a massively impressive strike because the firm's data tells us that. The Staraya Toropa railway station has been evacuated in that region. The evacuation of the station began about 3 in the morning after the Toropetsky district of the region was attacked by drones. As a standard response, the Russian officials stated that all the damage was caused by debris of downed drones. Of course, that's the case. A lot of ammunition on the second Toropets ammunition depot was stored in the open air as well, but on the northern side of the depot, there is evidence that had been taken away, some of that. So we'll see, I guess, in the coming days, or maybe we won't. Russian authorities have closed access to the M9 highway between Kunya and Neledovo after the attack on the second ammunition depot. So this is serious enough to have closed the highway, relatively close. Now, Anton Gerashenko says Russian Telegram channels report that a second missile unit might have been attacked in the Tver region of Russia. Quote, those who have been hit there, so this is from the Russians, those who have been there say that the missile silos where the locks are like in a bunker. In May of this year, a drone fell there, and the military said that if it had exploded, it would have blown away everything for 30 kilometers around. They say there's a Satana missile on active duty there, so I think that's a nuclear missile. There's a crumbling railroad running through the area, which is not marked on a map. It seems that our and North Korean missiles were driven to the warehouse and back. So there's, images, photographic evidence that the Russians themselves happily seem to put on social media, detailing what goes on around here. On social media, you can really find groups of fellow servicemen from the unit in the village of Oktyabrski, so that's where this latest strike was. Former servicemen of the secret facility congratulate each other on the holiday of the missile forces and even post photos with those very cars with missiles. So not a great deal of OPSEC around there. No surprise it's been here. Intel Schizo says tonight Ukrainian one-way attack drones successfully struck and have severely damaged the Toropets South ammunition depot known as the 23rd GIAU arsenal at Oktyabrski. The depot sits 10 miles south, as mentioned, of the other one. The depot has not seen significant expansion since June 1964. The data right now indicates that moderate fire to the original storage depots going west to east along the rail and fire at the eastern outskirts of Oktyabrski. Now that I think there's subsequent firms data to show, as you can see here, that a bit more than that fire is taking place. So as they say, as Intel Schizo says, Toropets South ammunition depot protected 57, unprotected 14 buildings. Buildings on the southern end have been torn down and munitions are stored in the open air unprotected. Footprint of these buildings used to measure 290 by 80 feet. Bulk of the buildings in the northern end of the depot measure 170 by 50 feet, etc., etc., etc. Toropets South is served by a rail spur from the branch line from Moscow to Velikaya Luki rail line. The depot is also served by a secondary road system connecting Toropets and Staria Toropa, and that's where the railway station's been evacuated. Total amount of the depot amount of munitions, if this depot is fully stocked, is roughly 10,000 tons stored inside the ammo bunkers, and likely around 4,000 tons outside. So maybe 14,000 tons of ammo might have gone up on the best case. The importance of Ukraine taking out this depot will be felt immediately, particularly in the Task Group North. The 23rd GIAU arsenal, like most Soviet and Russian military depots, such as 107th struck the other night, targeted earlier in a week, is directly connected to the Russian rail network. The 23rd has munitions shipped by RZD West to Velikaya Luki, then to Nevel, then south into Belarus, passing the Belarus ammunition depot, then continues to Vitebsk, Belarus, then crosses the border back into Russia, going to Smolensk, where it continues down to Bryansk, then Lvov or Oriol, then to Kursk, then to Belgorod to Task Group North. Other munitions continue from Kursk to Staroskol, and then to Valuki and occupied Ukraine, or to Voronezh, continuing south towards Rostov and then back into occupied Ukraine. So open source has tracked the routes of all of this ammunition. This depot also highlights the complicity and involvement of the Belarusian government in Russia's aggression in Ukraine by continuing to allow Russian railways freedom to ship military goods through their country before going back to Russian forces in Ukraine. To further highlight the importance of Toropets and the rail line to Smolensk, the Task Group North recall August the 12th, 2024 thread on the collapse of Russian railway, with Russian railways prohibiting Belarus railway from operating trains from Orsha, Smolensk and Vitebsk, Smolensk, and to include prohibition of Belarus trains from operating to Oriol and Kursk branches of the Moscow railway, effective immediately with no end date given. So, there's a little bit of detail of the Russian railway logistics concerning this ammunition. Right, I've just got back from my son's football match, so that's why my glasses are somewhat darkened. Okay, and there's some more news to add to what's happened actually that's just come out, I've just been seeing. But combined with the near total destruction of Toropets Northeast ammunition depot, nearly an entire month's worth. So we have heard maybe 3 months worth here. The combined is nearly a month's worth of munitions for Task Group North have been damaged, destroyed or disrupted. So it depends who you listen to is what the analysis is. This will severely, they say this will severely impact, short-term impact, not just the Russian counterattacking Kursk, but more generally across the entire front, forcing rationing of munitions and decreased fire missions across the theatres in Ukraine, as Russian commanders and general staff will have to make a decision on whether they want to equitably distribute resources, resulting in decreased supply across the entire front, or if they will decide to deprioritise one theatre, resulting in the Axis having significant reduction in supplies in order to keep up fire missions to support offensive operations elsewhere. And it'd be interesting to see whether they, talking about all that railway network, whether the Russians whether that's vulnerable also to the Ukrainian attacks. So on and so forth. You get the point. So huge destruction to that area of the front. And then that is just the first one of the two we're going to talk about. Nuclear missiles are stored at the 107th Arsenal on the Russian Missile and Artillery Directorate in Toropets, apparently. People are fleeing the area in fear of a drone attack. The blast would be capable of raising everything around to a radius of 30 kilometers. That was a claim from the Russians. I talked about that Satan, or the Satan missile, possibly being there. But anyway, didn't happen. Ukraine reportedly used triple-loaded Neptune missile to strike a Russian ammunition depot in Toropets, says UA Wire. Don't know if that's at all true. And then we move on to this second strike, or another strike, this time in in Krasnodar Krai, where the Tikhoretsk ammunition depot exploded as a result of drone strikes. Now, the latest I'm hearing, and this is to add to the breaking news piece I did earlier, that it wasn't just the ammunition depot, but it's also an airbase has been hit there. And that's a significant strike because that airbase has been involved in bombers taking off and striking Ukraine. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, the first thing to say about this place that was hit in Krasnodar Krai, and I'll show you where that is in a second, is that some of the footage is absolutely incredible. I mean, just huge mushroom cloud explosions coming from here. Really, really significant explosions. And bang, there you go. So a Russian munitions depot in Krasnodar region. This is the way Russia will be forced to stop its war in Ukraine, says Ilya Ponomarenko, not with begging or thinking about saving Putin's face or giving him another chance or twisting Ukraine's arm for compromises for peace, etc., etc., etc. This is the only way, and Ukraine is doing it right now. So I think Ukraine are doing a really good job over this week. And I think there's no coincidence that they are also presenting at the moment their victory plan to the US. I think this is like, here's our victory plan. And by the way, this is the sorts of thing we can do. And this is part of the victory plan. Here it is on paper and here it is on video. Do you get a sense of what we can do? Now, if you give us X, Y, and Z, we can do that times 10. So at night, Ukraine successfully attacked the 23rd GRAU arsenal in Krasnodar area. Strike was carried out on the main artillery ammunition depot in the Tikhoretsk region of the Krasnodar region. There were also 2 military units in the village. According to Russian sources, 101 drones were shot down during the whole thing, right? But yeah, huge 790th base of the Tikhoretsk area of Krasnodar Krai. Satellite images show the expansion of the base, began in mid-August 2023. Most likely the base is a main artillery ammunition depot for the Russian Federation, says PS01. Now, there's been wreckage found at the site of a Lyuti. So those are the twin tailed drones that we've seen a number of times, prop drones, apparently having some impact there, to say the least. The exact moment the explosion was captured on the dash cam of this vehicle. So as you do, I'm not showing it in big, unfortunately, because I get in trouble. And you can see a massive explosion there. Also, the remains of a 122mm rocket from a BM-21 Grad or a Tornado G system in the city of Tikhoretsk after the detonation. So these secondary explosions, rockets flying off everywhere. That was also going into this morning. So there have been these images throughout the day of lots of smoke there already, and then other mushroom clouds as further explosions have taken place. So Special Kherson Cat here says Russian ammunition depot in the Krasnodar region destroyed as a result of Ukrainian attack. The Tikhoretsk munition storage facility was confirmed as a storage site of the North Korean munitions by the White House in October 2023. So a year ago, it was thought that they were storing, and that's a massive explosion there, these North Korean missiles. Another epic video of North Korean munitions being demilitarized, says Special Kherson Cat. A very detailed article about the logistics of North Korean munition to Russia, including detailed description of the transformation of Tikhoretsk ammunition storage facility into a hub for North Korean munitions. So this has been a report by CSIS in August 2023 showed that, and the Americans then admitted in October that North Korean missiles were likely there. And then lots more videos of secondary explosions there, and then, as mentioned, videos going into this morning. And the air raid alarm is continually triggered by continued explosions there. So just to let you know where this is, you've got the Sea of Azov there, Berdyansk, Mariupol, and the border between Russia and Ukraine. You've got Vuhledar there, and it's down here opposite Crimea, really, across the Kerch Bridge and up there. So relatively close to the Ukrainian border. There are several interesting facts regarding this place. According to intelligence reports, it, as mentioned, contains North Korean missiles, just like the primary ammunition site in Toropets. Logistics hub is situated along important rail lines. The Russian rail network, yellow lines on the map here, intersects into Tikhoretsk and directly contributes to the Russian invasion into the Ukrainian regions in the east, Donbass, and the south in Crimea. The site is around 300 kilometers or 185 miles from the current front line. And then going back to PS01 here. Actually, sorry, going forward to Special Kherson Cat. Now we're hearing this morning that actually it wasn't just the ammunition depot, but it's this airbase that's really close as well that seems to have been struck, and there's some major burning going on there to have triggered that FIRMS data. For all who were worried about the lack of FIRMS data from Tikhoretsk, the FIRMS map has just been updated and shows multiple traces of fire in the area of the ammunition depot and northwestern part of the town. Traces of fire can also be seen on the territory of an active Russian military airfield, but there are no reports regarding the damage to anything in the airbase so far. That's not to say there isn't. I mean, if those are explosions there and fire is burning, you would expect something's been hit there. OSINT analysts drew attention to this ammunition depot. It's assumed that is how the ammunition was being prepared for shipment. Footage also shows trucks. The video shows a smoke mushroom above an exploded ammunition depot in Krasnodar region, as seen by residents of Tikhoretsk. So these are the sorts of caches of ammunition that you see in that Tikhoretsk ammunition depot. Lots to blow up there quite easily, fairly vulnerable, out in the open. Yet you might get these sort of dug in revetments or whatever that sort of these burns that sort of protect the ammunition to a degree, but it's out in the open. That's easily destroyable by drones, essentially. You don't need to get some kind of bunker busting munition to hit that. So really sizable explosions from there. Just so much footage coming out from all sorts of different sources, and this fire spreading. You can see the amount of smoke there, indicating that, and fires taking place in different places, indicating that it's quite a widespread area that has been affected. Anton Keshenko says North Korea sent 1,000 containers of ammunition to Russia, 300 of which arrived in Russia on September the 7th to the 8th. The containers first arrive at the ports of Najin, then by container ship Angara to Primorsky Krai, and then to the 719th Artillery Base in Krasnodar Krai, media reported. Now, this is happening to that base. I reported on that route in detail when I shared with you, I think it was a CSIS report some time back, and lo and behold, it's now been hit. More ammo depot destruction footage from Kremeny in Tikhoretsk region, Krasnodar Krai. It says Euromaidan Press. So what else can we add to that? Earlier today, Russian Telegram channel Astra noted that 2 military units are located in the settlement, locally referred to as the White Sheds, and a couple of units, 5722941 and 01704. Earlier, the governor had announced the evacuation of residents from the settlement without revealing its name. Ukrainian drones targeted the facility at night. About an hour ago, the second air raid alert was announced. Unclear that there's a second attack, though. More likely other munitions firing off, and then more satellite imagery coming out, and then more indication that the airbase was hit. According to NASA firms data, not only the ammunition depot, but also a local airfield. That's fairly significant fires, as mentioned. Quote from Tatarigami: overall, amid the new routine drone attacks deep into Russia, the strikes on the GRAU arsenals number 107 and 23 and the ammo depot in Tikhoretsk may look routine. However, this event can be compared to the destruction of the Moskva cruiser. It's not just about the munition volume, but also the RAO, missile and artillery weapons. Really significant stuff. And Military Watch also talking about how the airport has been struck too. They're unclear whether the base was a target of a separate attack or the fires were caused by the explosion in the nearby ammo depot. That's talking about the base. I'd imagine if the base is nearby, they're going to be striking both. Tikhoretsk AB is a home to 627 Training Aviation Regiment used by the Krasnodar Higher Military Aviation School of Pilots. Satellite photos from the 28th of April this year show that in addition to the usual complement of L-39C and DA-42T trainers, there were at least 10 Su-27s or Su-35s deployed there. So significant aviation targets could also be at that airbase. Low resolution Sentinel-2 imagery from the 16th of September shows up to 12 Su-27 or Su-35 fighters present at the airbase. So this week, an awful lot of fighters there. So there could be some significant damage to aviation as well. Fingers crossed. Right. And then to add to that, as I was at football, this has happened too. So in Krasnodar, or news is coming out of this, Krasnodar region, again, same place, Molkino village, the Wagner PMC base is burning. As reported in the village where the Wagner base was located for almost 10 years, administrative buildings are burning. And there's a lot of footage coming out concerning that as well. So the main base of the former Wagner PMC in Molkino is burning up there. Reason unknown. Budanov smiley face. Yeah, so lots and lots happening. It's a really significant day for the Ukrainians. The Russians are going to be smarting, no doubt, because of these strikes. Right, then we're going to go on to other bits and pieces, and I'm sure more information will emerge as the day goes on. So this is quite a heartbreaking video, really, of a young Ukrainian soldier who's 22, returning home after 2 years in Russian captivity. He doesn't talk. He doesn't recognize his own mother. He doesn't react to anything. His comrades say he was tortured with electroshock. It's just really, really sad. That's pretty heartbreaking and shows how much pain and suffering is taking place. 95% of prisoners are thought to have been tortured by the Russians in captivity, and it gives you an indication of how long and how much work will have to be put into rehabilitating many of these people. Torture and imprisonment will affect people in different ways, just like normal everyday life affects us in different ways. And some people will really, really struggle to overcome the psychological effects of the Russian treatment there. And talking of Russian treatment, Russia have completed their own investigation into the death of Russell Bentley. So Russell Bentley was an American who fled to Russia to fight in Ukraine for the Russians. So he was pro-Russian, they say, but he ended up disappearing, and there was a bit of a hunt for him, and then he turned up dead. They say 3 soldiers, Russian soldiers, tortured and killed him in April, and then placed him in a car and blew up the car to destroy the evidence. The soldiers' unit then removed his remains from the scene to further cover up the event. I don't know whether the US are going to look into this themselves. Obviously, it's a bit uncomfortable because this guy was fighting for the Russians, and most people in the West don't view this guy particularly well. And there he is showing off his Russian medals. But he was, certainly murdered by, tortured and murdered by Russian soldiers. And that's the Russians admitting that. So, yeah. And then what do we hear? So this is the last thing I'm going to say. 49% of Russians support the withdrawal of troops from Ukraine, according to a poll. A majority of those surveyed, 53%, also said it was more important for Russia to oust Ukrainian forces from Kursk Oblast than to occupy more territory in eastern Ukraine. This is quite, illustrative, this survey. Some of these surveys that come out of Russia, you never quite know, how accurate they're going to be. This is effectively a dictatorship where surveys are going to be a little bit But there are some who claim that actually the surveys are fairly good, all things considered. And either way, the numbers that are going to come out of this survey that are somewhat critical of Russia will be the lowest end of the benchmark, right? So if you're saying 49% of Russians support withdrawal of troops from Ukraine, then you can bet your bottom dollar is going to be well over 50%, because there'll be a lot of people who won't be prepared to answer truthfully in this, answering exactly how they think they should answer because they don't know whether they are going to be tracked down or whatever. So if 49% of people are critical of, essentially we can infer are critical of Russians still being in Ukraine, then that's really going to be over 50%, which is not good for general support for the war efforts in Ukraine. The longer this war goes on, the more the Russian population will not be happy with rising inflation, with huge interest rates, with the cost of this in economic terms, but also in human terms, of people dying, coming back in body bags, of no money being invested in the welfare state, in education, in healthcare, etc., and all the money just being drained off by this war in Ukraine, a war that has no real meaning for the everyday Russian. Like, they weren't 3 years ago thinking, do you know what I really want every day? I'm thinking I really want us to be invading Ukraine now. That's what I really want. That's not what the Russians were thinking. This is a kind of a frivolous war, and and for something to be so horrific and so causing so much death and destruction, for it to be a kind of frivolous, narcissistic fever dream of a megalomaniacal dictator, is just insulting to the Russian public. Although there's a lot of pliable Russian opinion inside the Federation, and a lot of people who would have been against the war would have left the Federation already. For those who are left to have this opinion, I think is incredibly damaging for Russia. So yeah, it's been a very busy night. I think the Ukrainians, yes, they're suffering on the front lines, and eastern Ukraine is challenging, but my goodness, they are having a massive effect outside of that context. And when you add that together with the economic impact of sanctions and political impact of Western nations pressuring Russia, is the screw turning on Russia? Can we expect to see more of these kind of hits as the weeks go on? Can we see, like I said last time, there's a massive wave of drones. I'd like to see that happen more than once a week, more than once a month. I'd like to see that several times a week. Well, this week we have seen 3 ammunition depots be absolutely mullered, and possibly an airfield too, and a Wagner base on fire as well. Good stuff for the Ukrainians. Can they keep up that pressure? And then the question is, well, what is the Russian reaction to this? Will we see, because, a red line essentially has been crossed without it really being crossed. Like, red lines, these are kind of invented abstract ideas. But essentially what Ukraine has done is what the US will not allow themselves to be a part of. That we don't want to provide missiles that would do things like this. So the Ukrainians have gone on and made their own weapons, done that, and Russia haven't set off a nuclear missile, right? So that red line has been crossed. And when you have RFK Jr., Donald Trump Jr. and Jake Sullivan like whinging about this kind of activity, if nothing happens, then it gives more rationale to supplying Ukraine with the right weapons and the ability to use those weapons accordingly. Anyway, that's enough for me. Take care, everybody. Speak soon.